Christina. This is video 1 of tutorials for the Garden Star Sampler. These are originally created for the Beyond Beginner class for Summer's Haven, and they'll take you through each of the steps, each of the blocks for completing this quilt that was designed by A Quilting Life Designs. It is the Garden Star Sampler. It was a block of the month. There are a lot of really great directions within the pattern. You will need the pattern to actually complete the project. We're not going to be including the measurements and those type of things that you're going to need in order to complete the quilt, so you will need the pattern itself. This is a quilt that could be made in 2 different sizes. So there's 12-inch square blocks or 6-inch square blocks. And these can either be the finished quilt. If you do the 12-inch blocks, that finished quilt will be 51.5 by 66.5, or if you go with the 6-inch blocks, it will be a wall hanging that's 27.5 by 34.5. There are 6 different blocks, and you're going to be making each of them twice. The pattern also includes the beautiful sashing that you see here and the border. I have covered the cutting directions here so that we can protect the copyright of the pattern, but I'm also going to suggest that when you make your decision about whether to do the 12-inch blocks or the 6-inch blocks, whichever one you decide not to do, you can use post-it notes like this to cover up those other measurements so that you don't accidentally cut the wrong size for one of your blocks. Another thing that's important to remember is that for the cutting for each of the blocks, the cutting directions are for one of the block, and you're actually going to be making 2 of each of the 6 blocks in order to have 12 to complete your project. So you're going to want to make sure that when you're cutting for those blocks that you're cutting twice as many as what it's saying in that column for that size block. On the next page is where you'll find your sashing and your border directions. She does give you a helpful hint in the directions that you may want to wait to cut your borders until the end in order to make sure that they're accurate and match the size of your quilt top. We all know that sometimes your 1/4 inch can be a little bit different, or maybe you starched or didn't starch, or the pressing. All of those things can result in your quilt top being just a little bit different size than what it's called for in the actual quilt. So she does make that recommendation that you may want to wait to cut your borders until afterwards. Okay, some materials that may be helpful for you in order to complete this quilt. One, you're going to need your pattern. It does have on the back the materials that are needed, the different fabrics. You're going to need your basic sewing supplies like your rotary cutter. Some of the things that I'm going to be using myself, I always recommend to beginners a great 12.5-inch ruler. This one is from Creative Grids. It has the really good non-slip dots on the back of it. It also has that 45-degree mark that you can use when squaring, especially for your half square triangles. I like a 12.5-inch because then you can square up anything all the way up to a 12.5-inch. And we're actually going to be using this to square up our blocks as we complete them too. Another ruler that I always recommend to beginners is a good 24-inch ruler. So this one here is, let's see, it's a 5-inch I've actually got a 5-inch, but my favorite is an 8.5 by 24-inch, and it fits the 24 by 36 mat that a lot of us have really perfectly. It's also handy to have one that's a little bit smaller. This one is 4.5 inches. I'll probably at some point be using a little bit smaller ones at different points to square up half square triangles or to square up our flying geese units. But what I always recommend to beginners is that you need a good 24-inch ruler, and you need a good size square ruler. I recommend, if you can't have any other rulers, you have a good 12.5-inch one and you have a good 24-inch one. Those are the good ones to start with as a beginner. Rulers can get crazy expensive. These you're going to have a lot of use from, so those are always the ones that I recommend that beginners purchase first. The other thing that may be helpful for you as you are working on this, and you'll see there's lots of thread and things on this one, is a design board. I made this one using just the foam core that you might find at Walmart or any other discount store. And I've got some batting glued to it and then just some binding along the edges. I've been using this one for years. Lori Holt also makes some really beautiful ones. She usually puts them out with each of her collections, and they are gorgeous and come in all different sizes. This one is it's about 14 inches. This one's about 14 inches square, and it's a really good size. I really like this 14 inch because you can put your 12.5 inch pieces on here. All the pieces that you would be using to make a 12.5 inch block fit really good on this 14 inch square. Some other things that are going to be helpful for you to have. I love friction markers as opposed to friction pins. These are great for marking for your half square triangles and your flying geese. I prefer the markers because they go across the fabric more smoothly than the pins. The pins can sometimes skip, so I generally prefer the markers. But one thing that's important to remember is that the Friction Company actually does not recommend these for fabric. They may or may not completely wash out. They're going to be okay in the usage that we're going to be using them for this particular pattern, because we're going to be marking cutting lines with it. So friction markers are one of my must-haves. The other thing that's going to be helpful for you when you're organizing for this particular quilt are some Ziploc bags or some other kind of storage, because I'm going to recommend, I'll show you in a second how we're going to use those, but some Ziploc baggies are going to be helpful. And then I like having a project box to put it all in, just to keep it all organized. You can get them at a lot of different places. I think I usually get mine at Michael's. I think they're intended to be used for scrapbooking supplies, but they actually work really perfectly for keeping your quilt organized. So those are some basic materials that you're going to want to have on hand. I'm going to give you a couple of hints. You're going to want to cut, I like to cut everything out. You could hold and cut your borders out later just to make sure that they're exactly the right size, but I like to cut out my entire quilt before I get started. It's a lot easier if I'm short on a piece of fabric to get it just a couple weeks after I've bought it than to get it like a year after I've bought it. It may or may not be available at the store. So I like to cut out everything, and then I like to organize it in the Ziploc baggies, and you'll see here I've got them labeled with the block. So like this one, this is going to be our first block that we're going to have in the video. This is the New England block, and I've got everything I need in here to make 2 of that New England block. So I have all of my fabrics are cut out and are ready to go in my project box. I've got my pattern ready to go. I've got my design board ready to go. And so we're going to get started in our next video with making that first block, the New England block.